I found out my best friend had been lying to every guy who ever tried to ask me out because one of them got drunk enough to tell me. At first, I laughed. I honestly thought it was one of those random drunken stories people invent after too many beers, but then he looked me straight in the eye and repeated it. Jude always told us you weren't interested. I frowned. What are you talking about? The first time I asked him about you, he said you didn't want to date anyone. I shrugged. I mean, that's not exactly weird. He shook his head. No, Finn, you don't get it. He took another sip before lowering his voice. He also told me you were moving away in a couple of months. That made me stop smiling. What? Yeah. He looked genuinely confused. He said there wasn't any point getting attached because you already had a job lined up across the country. I stared at him. I've never even left the city. I know that now. For a few seconds I couldn't even think of anything to say. Jude, my best friend, the guy I'd known since we were 12. Why would he tell anyone something like that? The guy sitting across from me noticed my expression changing. You seriously didn't know? I slowly shook my head. No. He leaned back in his chair. Damn. Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. My mind kept replaying every conversation I'd had with Jude over the past few years. Every time he'd casually mention another guy from the gym, every coworker who suddenly stopped texting, every awkward conversation that disappeared for no reason. I'd always assumed they had simply lost interest. Now I wasn't so sure. Jude and I had been inseparable since middle school. We met after I accidentally hit him in the face with a basketball during gym class. He laughed instead of getting angry. You've got terrible aim. I was passing. No, you weren't. I definitely was. He rubbed his cheek dramatically. Then your teammates should probably wear helmets. That stupid conversation somehow became a friendship that lasted over 15 years. We went to the same high school, the same college. Even after graduation, we rented apartments only a few blocks apart. People constantly assumed we were brothers, sometimes even a couple. Jude always laughed those comments off, so apparently we're married again. I didn't agree to that. You don't get a choice anymore. He'd sling an arm over my shoulder before dragging me toward whatever ridiculous plan he'd come up with that weekend. That was Jude. Confident, funny, the kind of guy who somehow made every room louder just by walking into it. Girls liked him, guys liked him, everyone liked him, including me, just not in the same way. I'd fallen for him years ago, quietly, hopelessly, and I had absolutely no intention of telling him because Jude was straight. At least that's what everyone, including me, believed. So, I buried those feelings where they belonged. Our friendship mattered too much to risk. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd move on. I'd date someone else, find somebody who actually wanted me. Simple. Except nobody ever seemed to stick around. About 3 years earlier, I'd matched with a guy named Evan. Cute, funny, loved old movies. We talked almost every day for 2 weeks before deciding to meet. The date never happened. He canceled the night before. His message had been short. Sorry, man. I don't think this is a good idea. That was it. No explanation. I figured he changed his mind. It happens. Then there was Daniel from work. He flirted constantly, asked for my number, Texted me first almost every morning, then nothing. Complete silence. Another guy from the climbing gym invited me out for coffee. He disappeared before we even picked a day. At some point, I stopped questioning it. Dating just wasn't working. Maybe I was unlucky. Maybe I wasn't interesting enough. Maybe something about me pushed people away. It hurt. But eventually I accepted it until tonight. When I got home from the bar, I couldn't sleep. The conversation kept echoing inside my head. Jude told everyone you weren't interested. Jude said you were leaving soon. It didn't make sense. Unless... No, there had to be another explanation. Jude wasn't manipulative. He wasn't jealous. He wasn't controlling. He was Jude. I grabbed my phone, scrolled through old messages, photos, vacations, birthdays, inside jokes. 15 years of friendship. Nothing looked different, but somehow everything felt different. Then something hit me. I opened Instagram, searched for Evan, still there. On impulse, I sent him a message. Hey, weird question. Years ago, why did you cancel our date? I didn't expect a reply. He answered 5 minutes later. Honestly, Jude told me you were moving to Seattle. I felt my stomach drop. Another message appeared. He also said you didn't want anything serious, and you'd only agreed to meet me because you felt bad. I stared at my phone. Then another notification appeared from Daniel. I'd forgotten we still followed each other. Wait, you're not engaged? My pulse started racing. No, he replied almost instantly. Your friend Jude congratulated me for respecting your relationship. I froze. Relationship? What relationship? There had never been anyone. Not once. My hands were shaking now. One lie? Maybe. 2. Coincidence? 3? 3 wasn't an accident anymore. I looked at Jude's contact picture. The same idiot smiling at the camera while wearing sunglasses indoors because he'd lost a bet. My best friend, the person I trusted more than anyone. Suddenly, I realized something that terrified me. I didn't know him nearly as well as I thought I did. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, another memory surfaced. Jude introducing me to people. Jude pulling me away from conversations. Jude answering questions before I could at the time. None of it had seemed strange. Now, every single moment felt different. By 7 in the morning, I had convinced myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe people misunderstood him. Maybe someone exaggerated. Maybe all of this was one giant coincidence. I wanted to believe that, I really did. Instead of accusing him, I decided to ask. Jude and I had a standing tradition every Saturday morning. Coffee, breakfast, the same little diner we've been visiting for almost 10 years. He was already there when I walked in, waving me over from our booth. There he is, he grinned. You look terrible. Thanks. You sick? Didn't sleep much. He frowned. You okay? I nodded automatically. Yeah. He studied me for a second longer before pushing my usual coffee across the table. I already ordered. You know me too well. I should after 15 years. That sentence hit harder than it normally would. I looked at him. Same messy brown hair, same easy smile, same guy I trusted with practically every secret in my life, including the biggest one, that I was hopelessly in love with him. He had no idea, or at least I thought he didn't, Breakfast arrived, but I barely touched it. Jude noticed almost immediately. "All right," he leaned back. "What's going on?" I took a slow breath. "I ran into someone last night." "Oh, Evan." He froze for the smallest fraction of a second, so small I almost missed it. Then he reached for his coffee. "How's he doing?" "I don't know. We didn't talk much." Another tiny pause. Then I said it. "He told me something weird." Jude didn't look up. "What?" "He said you told him I wasn't interested in dating." His hand stopped moving just for a second. Then he laughed. "Oh, yeah. I probably misunderstood something. You also told him I was moving away." His smile disappeared. He stared into his coffee instead of at me. "I might have mixed you up with somebody." I blinked. "Mixed me up? It was years ago." His answer came a little too quickly. "I honestly don't remember." I didn't respond. The silence stretched. Jude hated silence. Normally he'd crack a joke. Not today. Instead, he reached for his toast. His hand wasn't completely steady. I decided to push a little further. So I said casually, "I messaged Daniel too." Now he looked at me. "What about him?" "He thought I was engaged." Jude didn't answer. "He said you congratulated him for respecting my relationship." Another pause, longer this time. Then, oh. No denial, no confusion, just one quiet word. "Jude." Finally, he sighed. "I might have said something. Might have. I don't remember exactly." "You don't remember telling people I was engaged?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "It sounds worse than it was." "Worse than it was?" "I was just trying to avoid awkward situations." I stared at him. "What awkward situations?" "They kept asking about you. I didn't know what else to say." "You could have told them to ask me." "I know, but I didn't." Neither of us spoke. For the first time in years, being around Jude felt uncomfortable. The conversation changed after that, or rather Jude changed it. He started talking about work, sports, movies, anything except what we just discussed. Normally I'd go along with it. This time I couldn't. "Why?" He looked up. "What? Why did you do it?" His jaw tightened. "I told you." "No, you gave me excuses. I asked why." He looked around the diner instead of answering. People were laughing. Servers moved between tables. The world kept going like nothing had happened. Finally, he said quietly, "I don't know." "You don't know?" "I really don't." I watched him carefully. He looked uncomfortable, almost guilty, but there was something else. Fear. For some reason, Jude looked scared. That afternoon, I couldn't let it go. Instead of heading home, I visited my friend Isabella. She'd known both of us since college. If anyone had noticed something strange, it would be her. She opened the door wearing paint-covered sweatpants. "Finn, what happened? You look like someone stole your dog." "I need to ask you something." 5 minutes later, we were sitting in her kitchen. After I explained everything, she didn't say anything, which worried me. "You knew," she sighed. "I wasn't sure." "You weren't sure about what?" She looked genuinely uncomfortable. "There were moments." "What moments?" "Guys would ask about you, and they almost always talked to Jude first." "Why?" She shrugged. "You two were always together." "Then what happened?" "They disappear." I swallowed. "You noticed?" "I noticed enough that I asked Jude once." My stomach tightened. "What did he say?" He laughed and he told me you had terrible taste in men and he'd probably saved you from another bad relationship. I blinked. He actually said that. She nodded. I thought he was joking. So did I. She hesitated. Finn, what? There was something else. I felt my chest tighten. What? Isabella looked almost apologetic. I've seen Jude watching you. What do you mean? The way someone watches? She stopped herself. No. What? She shook her head. It's probably nothing. Isabella, she sighed. Sometimes he looked jealous. The word hung between us. Jealous? Jude? That made no sense. Jealous of what? He had dated plenty of women over the years. I'd never once interfered. Why would he care who I dated? Unless... No. That was impossible, wasn't it? That evening my phone buzzed. Jude, can we talk? I stared at the message. A second one appeared. Please. Then another. I owe you an explanation. I didn't answer immediately. For the first time since we were kids, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear whatever he had to say, because deep down I had started wondering if the truth was something neither of us was ready to admit. I didn't reply to Jude until the next morning. Just 2 words, come over. He answered almost immediately, on my way. That told me he'd probably been waiting by his phone. 20 minutes later I heard a knock. When I opened the door, he looked exhausted. His hair was a mess. There were dark circles under his eyes, and for the first time since I'd known him, Jude looked nervous. I didn't sleep either, he admitted before I could say anything. I stepped aside. Come in. Neither of us spoke while I made coffee. The silence between us felt completely different than it ever had before. Usually it was comfortable. Now it was heavy. Jude sat at my kitchen table, rubbing his palms together. Finally, I put 2 mugs down. You said you owed me an explanation. He nodded. I do. I waited. Instead of speaking, he stared into his coffee. After almost a full minute, I broke the silence. Jude, I know. No more excuses, I know. No more. I don't remember. I know. I leaned back. Then tell me the truth. He closed his eyes. I was jealous. The words were so quiet, I almost didn't hear them. What? I said I was jealous. I frowned. Of who? The guys. I stared at him. The guys who asked you out. That didn't make any sense. Why? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I asked again, Jude, why? He looked like he wanted to answer. Instead, he looked away. I don't know. I laughed bitterly. No, you do know. You just don't want to say it. I noticed the first time when we were 20. His voice was barely above a whisper. There was this guy at college. I tried to remember. There were a lot of guys at college. The blonde one, Robert. He nodded. He kept flirting with you after class. I remembered Robert. Nice smile, engineering major. We'd studied together a few times. He asked if you wanted to get dinner. Yeah. You looked excited. I nodded slowly. I was. Jude let out a humorless laugh. I hated him immediately. Why? I don't know. You've said that already. I know. He ran both hands through his hair. I couldn't stand watching him look at you. The room went quiet. I searched his face. He wasn't joking. He wasn't smiling. He looked ashamed. So, what did you do? I told him you had a boyfriend. I blinked. Seriously? He nodded. He apologized to me, to you. He thought he'd embarrassed himself. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, you just... I lied. And then he never asked you out. I remembered wondering why Robert suddenly became distant. At the time, I'd blamed myself. Now, I knew that wasn't the only time. Jude shook his head. No. How many? Jude. I don't know. 10? He stayed silent. 20. Silence. Again, my stomach sank. There were that many. I stopped counting. I looked at him in disbelief. For how long? Around 7 years. 7 years. 7 years of chances I never even knew I had. 7 years of wondering why nobody body stayed. 7 years of believing there was something wrong with me because of him. I stood up. I need a minute. Finn, no. I walked onto my balcony. The cool air hit my face. I gripped the railing until my knuckles turned white. I wasn't just angry. I was hurt deeply. Jude had been the person I trusted most, and he quietly rewritten my life without asking. A few minutes later, the balcony door slid open. I deserve whatever you're thinking. I didn't turn around. You do. I'm sorry. I laughed. You don't even know what you're apologizing for. Yes, I do. No. I finally faced him. You stole years from me. His face fell. I know. No, you don't. My voice cracked. I thought nobody wanted me. His eyes widened. I spent years wondering what was wrong with me. I know you don't. I skipped dates because I assumed they'd cancel. I know. I stopped believing relationships were meant for me. Jude looked like I'd slapped him. I never wanted that. But that's what happened. He covered his face with one hand. I'm sorry. You keep saying that because I am. It doesn't fix anything. No, it doesn't. We stood there quietly. Then something occurred to me. There was one guy. Jude froze. The persistent one. His shoulders stiffened immediately. You know exactly who I mean. He didn't answer. His name was Grayson. Jude slowly nodded. He worked at the bookstore. You remember? I remember, unlike everyone else. Jude swallowed. He wouldn't stop asking about you. I remembered Grayson vividly. Kind, funny, patient. He always found excuses to talk to me whenever I bought books. One day he disappeared. I'd always wondered why. What did you tell him? Jude looked down. I told him he couldn't finish. What? I told him you were leaving the state. I stared at him. He didn't believe me, so I kept repeating it. My chest tightened. He still didn't believe me. I already knew there was more. So what happened? Jude's voice became almost inaudible. He asked you himself. I frowned. No, he didn't. He tried. What? I kept getting in the way. Every word made less sense. I told him you were overwhelmed. I told him work was stressful. I told him it wasn't the right time. I couldn't speak. Jude looked completely broken now, but he wouldn't give up. I remembered Grayson smiling every time he saw me, waiting until I finished shopping, asking about my week, then nothing. What finally happened? Jude closed his eyes. I told him you were moving in 2 weeks, and I told him you didn't want anyone to know because saying goodbye was too painful. I felt sick. He believed you. Jude nodded once. He wished me luck. His voice cracked, and then I watched him leave. Neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question that had been growing inside me all morning. Jude. He looked up. When you watched him walk away, I paused. Were you happy? For several seconds he couldn't answer. Then he whispered one heartbreaking word. No. No. Jude didn't hesitate this time. The answer came out broken, quiet, almost painful. I wasn't happy. I searched his face, trying to understand him. Then why? He laughed bitterly. I've been asking myself that for years. Neither of us moved. The wind pushed through the balcony, carrying the sounds of traffic from the street below. Jude rested both hands on the railing beside me. I'd feel relieved for a day, he swallowed, maybe two, and then I'd hate myself. I looked at him. So why keep doing it? His jaw tightened because every time someone got close to you, he stopped. I felt like I was losing something. Losing what? He looked at me. His eyes were red. I don't know. I almost interrupted him. Then I realized that wasn't true. He knew. He was just terrified of saying it. You do know. You've had years to think about it. He looked away. I thought if you met the right guy, his voice cracked, you wouldn't need me anymore. The sentence hit me harder than I expected. What? You'd fall in love. So you'd build a life. So you'd stop calling me first. I blinked. You'd stop asking me to watch movies. I stayed silent. You'd have someone else to tell everything to. He laughed once without humor, and eventually he rubbed his face. I'd become the friend you text twice a year. I stared at him. You really believe that? I convinced myself I did. I remembered something Isabella had once told me. Jude was always the first one to volunteer whenever I needed help. Moving apartments, car trouble, late-night phone calls. He never said no, not once. At the time, I'd thought he was simply the best friend anyone could ask for. Now, I wasn't sure anymore. Jude, he looked at me. Did you ever date anyone seriously? He frowned. What? In 15 years. You had girlfriends? A few. They never lasted. He smiled sadly. No. Why? He hesitated. I always found something wrong with them. He nodded. They weren't funny enough. They talked too much. They wanted too much attention. I didn't feel a spark. He shook his head. There was always an excuse. Then he added quietly, I don't think any of them ever had a chance. A strange feeling settled in my chest. Not hope, not yet. Just confusion. Jude. He met my eyes again. Did you ever think you might be? He immediately knew what I was asking. His breathing stopped for a second. I tried really hard not to. Not to what? Think about it. Why? My dad. That surprised me. What about him? Jude looked down. He wasn't exactly accepting. I knew that his father had always been strict, traditional, the kind of man who thought emotions made people weak. Jude rarely talked about him. He used to say things. What things? If a man liked another man, he couldn't finish. He'd say they were broken. Silence. I grew up believing that. I finally understood at least part of it. You thought something was wrong with you. He nodded. So every time I felt his voice disappeared, I buried it. We went back inside. The coffee was cold now. Neither of us touched it. I sat across from him. So what now? He looked surprised. What do you mean? You've admitted you lied. Yeah, you've admitted you sabotaged my relationships. Another nod. You've admitted you were jealous. His shoulders sank. Yeah, but you still haven't answered the biggest question. He looked confused. I took a deep breath. Why me? The room became completely silent. Jude stared at the table. His fingers tightened around the mug. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. I've asked myself that every day. That's not an answer. I know. So, answer me. He slowly lifted his head. I don't think I can. Why? Because if I say it out loud, his eyes met mine. Everything changes. I wanted him to say it. God, part of me had wanted him to say it for years, but another part was terrified because if he did, there would be no pretending anymore, no hiding behind friendship, no going back. Before either of us spoke again, my phone buzzed. Isabella. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered, Hey, Finn. She sounded serious. Are you with Jude? I looked at him. Yeah, I think there's something you should know. What? I ran into Grayson today. I froze the bookstore. Grayson? Yeah, he asked about you. My heart skipped. What did you tell him? The truth. I stood up. What happened? There was a brief pause. He laughed. He said, she hesitated, he always suspected Jude was lying. I looked at Jude. His face had gone completely pale. Finn, Isabella continued softly, Grayson said something else. What? He never stopped wondering what would have happened if he'd asked you directly. For a second, nobody spoke. Then Isabella quietly added, He's still single. She hung up. The apartment felt impossibly still. Jude didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even seem to breathe. Finally, he whispered, I deserve that. I looked at him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. He looked defeated, like he'd finally realized the full weight of what he'd done. And for the first time since this all started, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing an argument, fear of losing me. Jude left about 10 minutes later, not because I asked him to, because he looked like he couldn't stand being in the apartment anymore. He stopped at the front door. I'm sorry, Finn. I nodded. I know. I never meant to hurt you. I believe you. That surprised him. You do? I believe you didn't want to hurt me. I looked him in the eyes. But you did anyway. He lowered his head. I know. He reached for the doorknob, hesitated, then quietly said, I'll leave you alone. And then he was gone. The apartment felt strangely empty, not because Jude had been there for an hour, because he'd been part of almost every day of my life for 15 years. For the first time, I wondered what life would look like without a minute. The thought hurt far more than I expected. That scared me because after everything he'd admitted, part of me still wanted him around. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. Jude didn't text, didn't call, didn't show up at my apartment. It was exactly what I'd wanted. So why did it feel wrong? I caught myself reaching for my phone several times just to tell him something funny I'd seen online. Every time I remembered things weren't normal anymore. By Thursday evening, Isabella had enough. She knocked on my apartment door carrying takeout. "You look miserable." "I've looked miserable all week." "Exactly." She handed me a bag. "Eat." We sat on the couch in silence for a while. Finally she asked, "Do you miss him?" I answered too quickly. "No." She raised an eyebrow. "Finn?" I sighed. "Yes," I figured. "I also want to strangle him." "That too?" "Definitely that too." She smiled sadly. "I've never seen you go this long without talking." Neither had I. "Can I ask you something?" Isabella nodded. If I searched for the right words, if Jude actually has feelings for me, she waited. "Does that excuse what he did?" She answered immediately. "No, I appreciated that. It explains it, but it doesn't excuse it." I nodded. "Those are different things." "They are." She leaned forward. "The real question isn't why he lied. It's whether you can trust him again." That question stayed with me long after she left. Saturday morning arrived. No breakfast at the diner, no sarcastic comments, no Jude. Around noon I decided to go for a walk. Halfway through the park I heard someone call my name. "Finn!" I turned around. It took me a second to recognize him. Grayson. He looked older than I remembered, a little broader. Same warm smile, same kind eyes. "Wow," he laughed. "It's really you." I smiled awkwardly. "Hi. I wasn't sure you'd remember me." "I remember." We stood there for an awkward second before he rubbed the back of his neck. "So, I guess this is weird a little," he smiled. "I always hoped I'd run into you again." Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. "You heard?" He nodded. "Isabella called me." I sighed. "I'm sorry." "What for?" "For," I gestured vaguely, "everything." Grayson laughed softly. "You didn't do anything. I still feel like I owe you an apology." He shook his head. "Honestly, I never blamed you." We ended up walking together through the park. It felt surprisingly easy, natural. Grayson looked at me. "Can I tell you something embarrassing?" "Sure." "I had the biggest crush on you." I laughed. "I kinda guessed." "No, you really didn't. I was awful. You weren't subtle." He smiled. "I kept asking Jude if you were seeing anyone." I winced. "I know." He always had an answer. He did. "Finn doesn't want a relationship. Finn's moving away. Finn's too busy with work." He laughed to himself. I believed every word. "I'm sorry. You've already apologized." He looked ahead. "Funny thing is, what? I never believed his eyes." "What do you mean?" "When Jude talked about you, he hesitated. He looked like someone protecting something." I frowned. I thought maybe he was just an overprotective friend. He chuckled. "Then one day I asked if he'd ever introduce us." And Grayson smiled sadly. He changed the subject so fast I almost got whiplash. I couldn't help laughing. It sounded exactly like Jude. We stopped near the lake. Grayson leaned against the railing. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Are you in love with him?" The question caught me completely off guard. I stared at the water. "I've spent years pretending I wasn't, so that's a yes." I smiled weakly. Yeah. Still, I closed my eyes for a second. Yeah. Grayson nodded like he'd expected that answer. I figured. You did? The way you talk about him? He shrugged. You don't sound angry. I am angry. No, you sound hurt. He was right. Anger had faded. The hurt hadn't. As we started walking again, Grayson suddenly stopped. Don't move. What? He pointed across the street. I turned. Jude. He was standing outside a grocery store carrying 2 bags. He hadn't seen us yet. Or maybe he had, because the second our eyes met, he froze. Then he looked at Grayson, then back at me. His expression changed instantly. Not to anger, not to jealousy, just heartbreak. He looked like he just watched 15 years disappear in front of him. Without saying a word, he turned around and walked away. I instinctively took 1 step after him, then stopped. Grayson quietly asked, Are you going after him? I watched Jude disappear into the crowd. For the first time in years, I honestly didn't know what the right choice was. The word caught in my throat. Jude had already disappeared into the crowd. Grayson didn't rush me. He simply stood beside me, hands in his pockets, watching the direction Jude had gone. You still love him? It wasn't a question. I let out a long breath. I don't know if love is the problem. What is? I don't know if I can forgive him. Grayson nodded slowly. That's fair. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, he smiled. For what it's worth. What? I hope you find whatever gives you peace. I looked at him. You mean with Jude? I mean with yourself. He laughed softly. If that's Jude, great. If it isn't, he shrugged. That's okay too. There wasn't a hint of bitterness in his voice, just honesty. I realized then why I'd liked him all those years ago. He was the kind of person who made you feel safe. Before we parted ways, Grayson pulled out his phone. I'd still like to be your friend. I smiled. I'd like that too. We exchanged numbers. As he started to leave, he turned back. One piece of advice. Sure. If you decide to talk to Jude, he hesitated, make him earn the conversation. I frowned. What do you mean? Don't let him explain his way out of what he did. He doesn't deserve that. He gave me one last smile. But don't punish yourself by pretending you don't care. Then he walked away. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the look on Jude's face. It hadn't been jealousy, it had been resignation, like he'd already accepted that he'd lost me. My phone buzzed around 9. Isabella, how'd it go with Grayson? I called her instead of texting, so she answered immediately. I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment, then she asked, Did Jude say anything? He didn't even come over, he just left. She sighed. I was afraid of that. What do you mean? I talked to him yesterday. I sat up straighter. You did. He asked if you seemed happier. I blinked. That's all. He didn't ask where you were. He didn't ask if you were dating. He just wanted to know if you smiled this week. That caught me off guard. He said, Isabella paused, that if losing you was the price for finally telling the truth, he'd accept it. Sunday afternoon, someone knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, there was no one there, just a small cardboard box. My name was written across the top in Jude's handwriting. I carried it inside. There wasn't a note. Inside were things I'd forgotten even existed. A photo from our first camping trip, movie ticket stubs, a cheap plastic trophy we'd won together at an arcade when we were 16, birthday cards, a friendship bracelet I'd made him in middle school because I'd been convinced we were too old for matching bracelets, but secretly wanted one anyway. At the very bottom was an old envelope. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper. My heart started beating faster. It was my handwriting. I unfolded it carefully. Then I laughed in disbelief. It was a list. Things we should do before we're 30. I'd written it when we were 19. Go skydiving, road trip across the country, see the northern lights, learn to surf, own a dog, stay best friends forever. Every item had a little check mark next to it, except one, the last line. Find people who make us as happy as we make each other. No check mark. Instead, someone had drawn a tiny question mark beside it. Jude. It had to be. I stared at that question mark for a long time. My phone buzzed. A text from Jude, the first one in over a week. The box isn't an apology. A second message appeared. You deserve better than a box. Then another. I just thought those belong to you if you decide we're done. I read that sentence 3 times. If you decide we're done, not if we can fix this, not please forgive me, just if you decide. It sounded like someone who had finally stopped trying to control the outcome. For the first time since all of this started, he was leaving the decision to me. That evening, I drove to the diner, not because I expected Jude to be there, because I needed to think. The owner, Miles, recognized me immediately. Where's your shadow? I smiled sadly. Long story. Miles poured me coffee anyway. You boys finally have your first real fight? I looked up. First real fight? He laughed. I've watched you two for almost 10 years. You've disagreed plenty, but never like this. I hesitated. Can I ask you something? Shoot. Did Jude ever talk about me? Miles smiled all the time. My heart skipped. What did he say? Mostly embarrassing stories. I laughed. Sounds like him. But every now and then Miles leaned on the counter. He'd ask me something strange. What? How do you know when you've loved someone too long to tell them? I froze. Miles continued. I always assumed he meant an old girlfriend. He shook his head. Guess I was wrong. I left the diner just before closing. As I unlocked my car, I noticed someone sitting on the bench across the street. Jude. He hadn't seen me. Or maybe he had and was pretending not to. He looked exhausted. He was just sitting there staring at the empty diner like he couldn't bring himself to go inside without me. I stood there for several seconds. Then I crossed the street. He looked up when he heard my footsteps. His expression was a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. I wasn't waiting for you, he said quietly. I couldn't help smiling. You've always been a terrible liar. For the first time in days, a tiny, genuine smile appeared on his face. You've always been a terrible liar. Jude looked down at the sidewalk and let out the smallest laugh. Guess that finally caught up with me. I sat down on the other end of the bench, not too close, not as far apart as strangers, somewhere in between. For a few minutes neither of us said anything. Cars passed. The diner's neon sign buzzed softly above us. It felt strangely familiar, like all the nights we'd spent sitting in comfortable silence after dinner. Except this silence wasn't comfortable. It was careful. I went to your apartment. Jude spoke without looking at me. I know you weren't home. I was walking. He nodded. I figured another pause. I almost came inside the diner tonight. What stopped you? He smiled weakly. I realized every memory I have of that place includes you. I looked across the street. I didn't want to ruin another thing you loved. That sentence stayed with me. For the first time, he wasn't talking about what he wanted. He was thinking about me. I got your box. He nodded. I wasn't trying to guilt you. I know. I almost threw half of it away. I looked at him. Why? Because I didn't think I deserved those memories anymore. You do. He frowned. I lied. You did. I manipulated people. You did. I hurt you. My chest tightened. You did. He nodded slowly. So, how can I deserve them? I thought about it for a long moment because those memories were real. He looked at me. Our friendship wasn't fake. Jude, I swallowed. What you did was real. But so was everything else. The camping trips, the birthdays, the nights you stayed at the hospital when my mom had surgery, the time you drove 6 hours because my car broke down. I smile faintly. You've been there for every important moment of my adult life. His eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to separate that man from the one who lied to me. He covered his face with both hands. I don't expect you to. His voice shook. I've spent the last week trying to figure out how I became someone capable of hurting the person I... He stopped. I looked at him. The person you what? His hand slowly dropped. He looked exhausted, like he was done hiding. The person I love. There it was. No hesitation, no excuses, just the truth. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it made my heart ache, because I could hear how much it had cost him to say those words. I've loved you for years. He stared straight ahead instead of at me. I don't even know when it started. I just remember one day realizing that every good thing in my life somehow involved you. He laughed quietly. I told myself it was normal. Then I told myself it would pass. It didn't. I dated women because that was easier than admitting the truth. I convinced myself that if I ignored it long enough, he shook his head, I'd become the person everyone expected me to be. I listened without interrupting. When guys started asking you out, he closed his eyes. I panicked. I wasn't thinking about your happiness. I was thinking about losing mine. He finally looked at me. And that's the part I hate the most. I took a deep breath. Can I tell you something? He nodded. I loved you too. His eyes widened. Probably around the same time. He didn't move. I never said anything because I thought you were straight. A tear rolled down his cheek. I know. I watched you date women, so I buried it. I convinced myself we were better off as friends. I laughed softly. I guess we were both pretending. He smiled through his tears. We were really bad at it. For the first time since we'd sat down, the tension eased. Not disappeared, just shifted. Jude wiped his face. I love you. I know you love me. I do. He gave a tiny, hopeful smile. That sounds like good news. I looked at him for several seconds. It would have been. His smile faded. If you trusted me. He closed his eyes. I know you made choices for me. I know you didn't give me the chance to decide. I know every answer was the same. No defensiveness, no arguments, just acceptance. I don't know if I can start a relationship with someone I don't fully trust. His shoulders slumped. I understand. And I don't know how long it'll take. I understand. I can't promise anything. I know. He stood up. I won't ask you to. I looked up at him. What are you going to do? He smiled sadly. Probably what I should have done years ago, which is get therapy. I blinked. I've already scheduled an appointment. That surprised me. I have a lot to figure out. He looked down at me. If there's ever any chance, he shook his head. No, I'm not asking for one. I'm just saying I want to become someone who would never make those choices again. I believed him. That didn't mean everything was fixed, but I believed him. As he turned to leave, I heard myself call his name. Jude. He stopped. I walked over to him. Without thinking too much, I hugged him. He froze, then very carefully wrapped his arms around me, like he was afraid I'd disappear if he held on too tightly. Neither of us spoke. When we finally stepped apart, I smiled sadly one step at a time. He nodded one step at a time. He walked away. This time I didn't feel like I was losing him. I felt like we were finally starting from the truth. 3 months later, that was how long it took before Jude and I found something that almost resembled normal again. Not the old normal that was gone, maybe forever. This was something quieter, more honest. We started with short conversations, a text every few days, then coffee, not our diner, somewhere neutral. There was no pretending everything had been fixed. Sometimes our conversations flowed naturally. Other times there were awkward silences that reminded us how much had changed. Oddly enough, I preferred the awkwardness because it was real. Jude kept every promise he'd made. He started therapy. He never missed an appointment. He never used it as a way to earn forgiveness either. If I asked how it was going, he'd answer honestly. If I didn't ask, he never brought it up. One afternoon he told me something that stuck with me. My therapist asked me why I thought love gave me the right to make decisions for someone else. He smiled sadly. I couldn't answer. I looked at him. I think I finally understand. What? I wasn't protecting you. I was protecting myself from being rejected. There was no excuse hidden in those words, just accountability. That mattered more than I expected. Grayson and I stayed friends. We grabbed lunch every couple of weeks. He even joked that we'd skipped the awkward first date stage and gone straight into comfortable friendship. One afternoon he asked me, "Have you made a decision?" I smiled. I don't think love works like that. No, I think it's hundreds of little decisions. He laughed. That sounds complicated. It is. He nodded. I hope he knows how lucky he is. So do I. Grayson eventually started dating someone he met through work. When he introduced us a few months later, I couldn't stop smiling. As we left the restaurant, he pulled me aside. I'm happy. I can see that. He looked at me carefully. I hope you get there too. I think I'm getting closer. It happened on a rainy Thursday. Jude texted me. Need help moving a couch? I laughed out loud. You seriously asked the wrong person. A few seconds later, yeah, but you're the only one who won't judge my terrible furniture choices. I drove over anyway. The couch was impossibly heavy. Halfway up the stairs, we both lost our grip. It slid backward, and we ended up sitting on the landing completely out of breath. Then Jude started laughing. Really laughing. The kind I hadn't heard in months. I joined in. People walking past probably thought we were crazy. When we finally caught our breath, he looked at me. I missed this. So did I. Not the lies, not the pretending, just us. A few weeks later, we returned to our diner. Miles looked up as we walked in together. There you are, he grinned. I was starting to think one of you had finally come to your senses. Jude laughed. Only took us about 15 years. Miles pointed toward our booth. Your table's been waiting. As we sat down, everything felt strangely familiar. Except this time, neither of us had anything left to hide. After breakfast, we walked through the park, the same park where I'd run into Grayson months earlier. Jude stopped near the lake. I've been thinking. That usually worries me. He smiled. Fair. He took a slow breath. I'm not asking you to be my boyfriend. I waited. I'm asking if you'd be willing to let me earn the chance. There was no pressure, no manipulation, no assumption that I owed him anything. Just a question. When I finally had the freedom to answer for myself, I stepped closer. You know what? I've spent years wishing you'd ask me something like that. Hope flickered across his face, but I smiled. But we're doing this differently. He nodded immediately. Tell me how. No secrets. Agreed. No deciding what's best for me. Never again. If something scares you, I tell you. If something scares me, you tell me. He smiled. Deal. I held out my hand. He looked at it for a second before taking it. Warm, steady, honest. For the first time, it felt like we were choosing each other instead of one of us making the choice alone. Our first official date happened the following weekend. Nothing fancy. Mini golf, burgers, a walk downtown. At one point, Jude looked at me and laughed. What? We've basically been dating for 15 years. I bumped his shoulder. Don't ruin the moment. I'm serious. You already know my coffee order. You've seen me with food poisoning. You know exactly how grumpy I get when I'm tired. I laughed. I do. He reached for my hand slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. I didn't. Instead, I intertwined my fingers with his. It was such a small thing, but somehow it meant more than any dramatic confession ever could. A year later, Isabella hosted a barbecue. As she watched Jude helping me carry drinks into the backyard, she leaned over and whispered, "Was I right about what? Those jealous looks." I laughed. "You noticed before I did." She smirked. "I noticed everything." Jude walked over. "What are you two talking about?" Isabella smiled innocently. "Oh, just how unbelievably stubborn you both are." He nodded. "That's fair." She hugged both of us before quietly saying, "You know, I always thought your story was going to be about finally admitting you loved each other." She smiled. "But it wasn't." "What was it about?" She looked at us both. "It was about learning that love without trust isn't enough. And that trust," she squeezed my shoulder, has to be chosen every single day. I looked at Jude. He looked back at me. A year ago, I would have wondered whether he was hiding something. Now, if something was bothering him, he told me. If I was hurt, I told him. It wasn't perfect. No relationship ever is. But it was honest. And after everything we've been through, honesty felt like the greatest act of love either of us could offer. As we stood together in Isabella's backyard, Jude quietly squeezed my hand. This time, there was no fear that someone would take me away. No lies, no pretending. Just two men who had finally learned that loving someone means trusting them with the truth, even when the truth is terrifying. And somehow, that made all the difference.